Hey everyone, so as part of my upcoming video on the modern history of Fantastic Four comics, I actually sat down with and interviewed Ryan North, the current writer of the ongoing Fantastic Four series. We had a brilliant conversation for over an hour, and I wanted to share some of that with you right now. The full interview is available to watch on my Patreon, and sections of it will be used in the upcoming video, but there's a particular section that I wanted to put on YouTube right now. So here's us discussing how Ryan was approached to take over writing Marvel's first family, and how he crafted the central ideas behind his run. I hope you enjoy it. Before we continue though, just a quick reminder to leave a like on this video if you enjoy it, and subscribe to Owen Likes Comics so you don't miss out on any future videos. In regards to the Fantastic Four, were they a team that you were reading before you worked in the industry?
No,
Or you kind of came to the team quite new?
I came to it completely, well, not completely new, like I knew of them. I had seen their cartoon from the 70s, I think it was. It wasn't, great, but I knew who the characters were, and I'd read comics here or there. I'd read the first number 1, number 2, number 3, where he turns Skrulls into cows. Like the old weirdness of the early Marvel universe is great, but I didn't have that depth of knowledge. I don't have that for many characters. I mean, when I was asked to write Squirrel Girl, I was like, isn't she the lady with squirrel powers? What's going on here? And took the weekend and read all I could about her, and then had a pitch at the end of it. And it was the same with Fantastic Four. It was a bake-off, which is where they ask a bunch of people, what's your pitch for Fantastic Four? And to Marvel and Tom Brevoort's credit, they told me it was a bake-off. They were like, hey, we're asking a bunch of people. We're not sure what we want to do next. Do you have a pitch for Fantastic Four? And I was like, yeah, you know what? I think I do. I think my pitch is, it's, what was that show? Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's that. This guy rolls up and he sees a problem and he fixes the problem and he leaves it better than it was. He just rolls through these small towns. The Fantastic Four would be 4 weirdos who show up to a weird place, fix the problem, and move on to the next thing. And we went back and forth, a couple revisions, and finally I was like, we're on revision 3. Like, do I have the job? And they were like, oh yeah, we didn't tell you. No, this is gonna be your book. I was like, no, nobody told me I was writing Fantastic Four. Thank you.
You'd think that would be kind of like quite a big deal to be writing like one of the Marvel books, and yet they kind of let you know in the most understated way.
Yeah. And it is a terrifying job because there's very few jobs in comics where you are starting something that was, or continuing something that was started by like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And anything you write will be compared against Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, John Byrne, Dan Slott, like everyone who's come before it, Hickman. They've done Fantastic Four. And so you are walking up to that plate and being like, I am also here. So it's not a non-terrifying job, but my idea with it was basically I was following Dan Slott, and he had gone super huge with the Reckoning War, Multiverse, like big. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. I can't do that. I'm not going to out Dan. What we will do is small stories. We will do single issue or 2-issue stories about these 4 weirdos who roll into a town and find a problem and make the world a better place. And I realized partway through, I was describing it in terms of like that Drive-Ins and Dives show, but that's not that far from the DNA of Star Trek, where they go to a planet and a bunch of weird future humans and aliens beam down and find a problem and fix it and go off to the next place. So it has kind of that Star Trek DNA that it took me forever to realize this. I was literally writing Lower Decks comics.
Well, I was going to mention that.
Oh, yes, there's some parallels here. this feels familiar. I can work with this.
I think that's a really good point to raise because, and as well, like that concept of like the kind of stranger that rolls into town and fixes a problem, to me is very like, and I'm not saying the book itself is of this genre, but that concept itself is so kind of Westerny.
Yeah.
And I remember reading the first issue of your run with Ben and Alicia, and that issue very much has that kind of like, almost like Clint Eastwoody kind of Western feel to it. And it's funny, I was talking to a friend of mine who doesn't read a whole lot of comics and basically will just read the things I shove in their face and be like, this is good.
That's trust.
But they've never kind of been a big Fantastic Four reader. I just managed to like get them into properly reading X-Men comics. So I've been kind of like, just every time I see them, just giving them, here's new X-Men, here's Astonishing X-Men, here's Wolverine and the X-Men, just trying to like drip feed them as much good stuff as I can find. And I gave them the first volume of your work. And the pitch I sold them on it, and I'd be really interested because you mentioned Star Trek, which I think is a kind of very similar thing. I described it as kind of 1/3 Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in the way that it's very like episodic, self-contained stories. It's one part Scooby-Doo and one part kind of Doctor Who.
Yeah, I'll buy that.
And I can explain the rationale behind them if you like.
No, I see it.
In terms of the Lee and Kirby comparison, obviously that's a high bar for anyone. What I meant in that is that like I read a lot of comics, I write about a lot of comics. This has been my job for the best part of a decade. Is that especially in kind of mainstream big two comics today, it feels like a lot of things is written for the trade. Everything is written as a big 6-issue story. And I've often found that going back and reading things in single issues, a lot of books, even some of my favorite runs of the last 10 or 20 years, that are quite clearly written as an arc, there's not a massive amount of enjoyment you can get out of reading issue 4 of a 6 or 8 part story. And something I really appreciate about your run is that you could read any issue of your Fantastic Four run could be someone's first issue, and I don't think they would have any problem getting into it, which to me feels like a very kind of throwback to 50s and 60s era comics. It has that kind of like Stan Lee, Gardner Fox kind of vibe about it, which is, in my opinion, unfortunately quite rare in this day and age.
Yeah, it's at the end of the first issue, there's a little like authorial letter being like, here's 4 pillars for the Fantastic Four. I literally just took that for my pitch for the book, be like, this is what I think it should be. The book needs to be accessible because here's a book that's been running with almost out any interruptions since the 60s. And there are people alive who've read every single one of those comics when they come out. And so you have to respect that and you have to build on that, but you can't expect everyone to have done that.
Yeah.
And you can't have this wall of continuity that stops people from doing it, because it's true, every book is someone's first book, and I always try to make every issue stand alone for that reason. But I pitched the book I wanted to read, which was a bunch of individual single one-shot sci-fi stories. And then I kind of franked myself because I realized I had to write it now. And the reason people do 6-issue arcs is because then you're thinking of a new story every 6 months.
Yeah, it's quite straightforward to plot that out. Whereas I can imagine, I was rereading the entirety. I read all 23 issues this week.
Oh, wow, thank you.
Myself. It was a wonderful time. As far as jobs go, trust me, it could be, I've worked far worse jobs than this. But I remember I got to like issue 10.
Space one.
Yes, the Long Way Home, which I want to talk about in detail later because that is one of the absolute highlights of that run. But I remember finishing that, and as soon as I like wiped the tears off my face, my initial thought was, how does he keep coming up with these like pitches for stories?
It's hard.
I remember there's another 13 issues and the rest that's still yet to come out. It's like, how is he still coming up with like these fascinating concepts and ideas that could be books of their own, and we're just getting kind of snapshots in through the prism of the Fantastic Four?
It is hard. I had the advantage that, like I said in that first issue, the Fantastic Four really can do anything. They have such a great set of powers, which makes them inherently interesting. They have such great relationships, and there's 5 of them on the team, despite the name, plus the 4 kids. Each of those has a relationship with everybody else. So there's like family dynamics and complexity there. But like you can do an issue where they're in a town full of Doombots, and you have an issue where one of them's falling down a hole with a dog, and then you have an issue where like you're showing them in space from the point of view of aliens, and you're basically treating them as monsters, as horrific creatures. And all of that fits within the big circle in the Venn diagram that is Fantastic Four. So to me, yes, it's hard to think of a new story every month, and you need a premise, you need a sci-fi idea, you need a twist, you need some moments of self-recognition and discovery. You have 9 main characters, all of that in 20 pages. But there's so many places that the Fantastic Four can go that it's not as limiting as it would be with, a single other character, because a lot of characters can't, no pun intended, stretch the way that the Fantastic Four can.